Good morning. This little book from Vimala Thakar, Life is to be Related. I'm going to begin with the second talk from Sydney, Australia, from the 8th of May 1982. Life is a mysterious wholeness. It is non-fragmentary, indivisible wholeness, wherever it exists. If we look at the cosmos, it's a field of innumerable energies acting and interacting upon one another. The earth is related to the skies, to the space, the mountains, the forests, the oceans, and the species that exist here on the earth are related to one another. But in the arrogance of the intellect and drunken with the power of knowledge, the human race felt that this whole kingdom of the universe exists to serve him, as though nature has no justification for existing by itself, but that the purpose of nature is to serve man. That seems to be the fundamental mistake that has been committed. The civilization and culture in which we live are the result of that fundamental pollution. We are organically related to this wholeness of life. The trees, the birds, the animals, the mountains, the oceans, the rivers, the lakes, the other planets, the sun, the moon, do not exist only to serve man. They have every right to be there, along with us. Unless the human mind learns a little humility and discovers this organic relationship with the totality, it does not seem possible that we will get rid of this suffering, this misery, this sorrow, the conflicts, the wars, violences in the midst of which we have placed ourselves intentionally or unintentionally. Now, how is it that the human race that could invent high technology, that could make wonderful discoveries, that could sophisticate and condition the human body and mind in such a marvelous way, committed such a basic mistake of looking upon itself as the master of everything that exists? How could it feel entitled to plunder and loot nature, to exploit the forests, the birds, the trees, the animals, and use them to satisfy its needs and psychological wants and greed, to exploit nature for physical and psychological pleasure? The ecological crisis that exists in the world today is the result of some contamination in the basic perception of life. The ecological crisis that exists in the world today is the result of some contamination in the basic perception of life. It seems to me that this mistake has been committed, perhaps naively, by the human race. Looking around and through the senses, coming in touch with the universe around it, the human mind must have wanted to relate itself to that which existed outside its own skin. Through the senses we perceive, but perceptions have to be communicated. They have to be reduced to concepts. They have to be reduced to some abstraction. The human beings must have started engineering the sound, the capacity to speak, and created words, ideas, and languages. We look at a form, give it a name, but never think about it, as we take everything for granted. We never go to the source of all, the concepts and all the symbols representing the concepts that we use in daily living. We created around ourselves a beautiful complexity, perceptions and concepts representing those perceptions. The content of civilization is a very rich and beautiful complexity. We're in the midst of it, but we may not be aware of it. We created a variety of concepts. For example, we looked at the infinity of life that we wanted to measure, and then the human mind created a concept of time. Life has nothing to do with the concept of psychological time that the human mind has created. Time exists only in the mind and not outside of it. The mind created the concept of time, organized the whole universal isness into seconds, hours, and days, worked out mathematically, worked it out mathematically. We needed a symbol to represent the concept of time, so clocks and watches were created. We have here the symbol, the watch, the concept, the psychological time, and the reality upon which this superstructure of psychological time has been projected by the human mind. Life is free of time. Life is timeless. Around us we only see the isness of life. We see the sun, the moon, but the moment we see the sun, we call it sunrise, because we want to relate ourselves to that event of seeing the sun. The sun neither rises nor sets, but the human mind, in a beautiful way, anxiously related itself to those events and created the sunrise and the sunset, saw the light and called it a day, saw the darkness and called it a night. This is the way the superstructure of concepts has been created by the human race and grafted upon reality. Reality is beyond and free of all concepts, but we need concepts in order to relate ourselves to life, the mysterious wholeness of life. We cannot remain unrelated to what we see around us. We want to relate, we want to measure it. So man arrived at the concept of space and started measuring the emptiness around. He developed the idea of kilometers and miles. Along with perception, concepts are fed into our brain. We're born with those concepts, and very soon after birth we get acquainted with the symbols representing those concepts. A very interesting concept is this concept of the ego, the self, the me, beautifully carved out and constructed. When a child is born, we give it a name to identify, to distinguish it from others. We teach the child that you are Harry. It really says Harry. Can't help it. It says Harry. We teach the child that you're Harry. Oh, or you're Robert. But life in the child is unnameable, as the emptiness in this room is unnameable. So we give the child a name, but life in the child is unnameable, as the emptiness in this room is unnameable. Life is immeasurable, unnameable, but the measurements are useful to enable us to relate ourselves to life. They have a utility to us. But if we mistake them for the essence of reality, then the misery and confusion begins. The first identification is with the name and the body, not only associated but also identified with them. The parents describe the form of the body, the color, the shape, and then the child learns to believe that it is a fair, brown, or black child, that it is tall or short. There are attributes of the structure, but this identification with the name, the form, the attributes of the form comes very early in life. When the brain begins to move, we call the qualities of the brain either intelligent or dull. So the child comes to believe that he or she is a dull or a brilliant person. The brilliance or dullness are the qualities of the brain, not of the life inside. But layer after layer of identification amalgamated into one concept, the me, the ego, what I consider myself. That which was only a means for distinguishing a person from another is mistaken for a physical reality. The I, the me, has a conceptual reality, not a physical one. Psychological time has a conceptual reality. We grow with the perceptions, the concepts, and the symbols, and we deal with the objects of perception with the help of concepts and symbols. The ideas, the thoughts, the words themselves are symbols. The use of concepts and symbols is useful for relating to life around us. We become so used to it, and year after year, we are functioning through these concepts so that we forget that they are contained, so that we forget that they are conceived by the human mind. Outside of the human mind, they have no existence. We forget that. We're unaware of that. That outside of the human mind, concepts have no existence. We create the concept of time, and we begin to be afraid of the tomorrows that do not yet exist. And we get entangled in the memories of the past that have already happened and are gone. And we get isolated from the reality of the present moment of life, that is in the here and now. Our whole thinking becomes a prisoner of the concepts and symbols when this identification comes about. We very conveniently forget the reality of life outside the concept. We forget that life exists. We forget that the word is not the thing and that the concept is not the reality. That is how we weave the self-created That is how we weave the self-created bondage around us and in us. It seems vitally necessary to me to investigate this issue of perception, concepts and symbols, and how we live through them. We forget that beyond the todays, the tomorrows, and the yesterdays, beyond the years and centuries, there is a vast isthmus of life, untouched by verbalization or by any concept. That isthmus of life is forgotten, and therefore the human race looks upon itself as the race of rulers over nature and over time. But we forget that the mountains and oceans had existed even far before us, and that they are more ancient, that this planet has been inhabited for millions of years. We lose the reverence for them, we lose the concern and the sense of care. We may have ecological conferences and discuss the issue of pollution. They may have a relevance to the present challenges confronting the human race, but it seems necessary to go to the root of it. Unless there is freedom from the grip of the symbols upon us, from the imprisonment in the world of concepts, that we have created an entirely new way of living. I read it one more time. Unless there is freedom from the grip of the symbols upon us, from the imprisonment in the world of concepts that we have created, an entirely new way of living may not emerge out of all our sincere and serious efforts. The human race is racing against time. The inner conflicts and incompatibilities contained in the modern way of living are getting exposed very quickly, and we cannot deal with one contradiction now and another 2 years later. We cannot deal with them piecemeal. We have to look at them holistically. A religious revolution is a holistic revolution. We have to grow into a holistic approach to life. As regards the other symbols and concepts, when they logically step by step are explained or communicated, there is an inclination to see the truth of them. There are two concepts that have had an indescribable grip upon our psyche: the concept of time and the concept of the ego. The, the I consciousness and this psychological time haunting us create fear and does not allow us to live freely and gracefully. It does not allow us to move through relationships without any inhibitions whatsoever. The first thing that the grip of this psychological time does is that it makes us postpone decisions and actions, postpone postpone crises. We feel that there is the tomorrow, that we will understand today, and we will act tomorrow. We understand. We see the truth today, but we'll act tomorrow. Now, there's nothing like next day in reality. In reality, there is only an isness. Life just simply is. But we create the tomorrow, the next day, and postpone the responsibility of taking decisions. We get into the habit of procrastinating, postponing every little thing in life. Meanwhile, between the today and the tomorrow comes the play of emotions and sentiments. The intensity of understanding that has taken place this moment, today, begins to fade away. In those 24 hours, the dynamic force of understanding as it takes place is not utilized. It fades away, and the fermentation of emotions, calculations, sentiments goes on in the mind, and the tomorrow never comes. We make many pious intentions, determinations. We promise ourselves so many things, but with the help of the conceptual time, we postpone action. If we really probe into our real lives and see how it happens, we will see how our lives are full of such postponements and procrastinations. The second thing that results from this concept of time is fear of death. The concept of psychological time creates an illusion that death is somewhere far away from us. It is not something near, as if it is not already with us. We divide life into life and death, and imagine that death is an entire and is an entity somewhere far away. So I'll read that again. The second thing that results from this concept of time is fear of death. The concept of psychological time creates an illusion that death is somewhere far away from us. It is not something near, as if it is not already with us. We divide life into life. We divide life into life and death, and imagine that death is an entity somewhere far away. Probably every minute we are dying, and every minute we are getting reborn. But we feel that death is far away, and we have read about it. So the idea of death and dying stimulates a dislike, and then a fear, then an obsession with the fear, and it inhibits our act of living in the now, the today. The acquisitive tendency of the I consciousness, to a very great extent, is a result of this fear of tomorrow, which is fear of death. We're worried about the idea of death and are thus busy to find out how to save ourselves from that. Again, we're not in relation with the present, with the now. We're busy with the anxiety, the worry, and how to get rid of that worry. In every inhalation and exhalation of breath being born and dying, move rhythmically. The grip of concepts and identification with symbols takes us far away from the mysterious reality of life. It's very essential to see that chronological time is there. The relation with the sun and the moon is there. And one doesn't say that concepts and symbols should be thrown away. They can't be thrown away. They are the substance of our being. We have to learn to handle the symbols and the concepts without breaking away from reality. We have to have a grip on the watch, have to function as a member of society according to the concept of time, and yet be aware of the timelessness of life. Then there will be no fear, no worry and anxiety about tomorrow. Then we live in the present thoroughly and fully. Then every moment we express our own being with full abundance, with spontaneity, and live every relationship so thoroughly and fully that there is no desire to look back upon what we had been doing an hour ago. The grip on the concept of time and the awareness of the totality that is timelessness creates a new balance in the human being. We move through the relationships. We move through relationships without any inhibition of fear. We pour our being into every relationship. If the actions, the relationships, the behaviors bring pleasure, then we also live through that pleasure fully and thoroughly without suppressing and repressing. If the actions and behaviors result in pain and tears, then we live equally and fully through those tears. Then life is lived fully. Fear doesn't allow us to live fully. It inhibits. We shrink in our skin, as it were. I'll read just a little bit more. The same thing happens with the other dominant concept, the I consciousness, the ego, the idea of the self, the me. We have forgotten that it is a contrivance to be used. It's a conditioning which has been fed into us, like many other conditionings. The conditioned energy of the I consciousness is not the total energy that may be within us. The I, the ego, with all its knowledge and memory, with all the human past contained in it, is not infinite. It's a finite entity created by the human mind, used for living together, very rich and complex, and yet maybe there, and yet maybe there are other energies in us which have not been conditioned by civilization and culture. If we accept the authority of the mind and the brain, if we accept the authority of the measurements created by the human race and say that this is the totality of life, that there is no life beyond what the human race has written about or experienced, and that there is no energy independent of or separate from the conditioned mind, the I consciousness, then life will not be worth living. I don't believe that man is born to live as a prisoner of this conceptual world. Out of the perception we created concepts and the conceptual world, a very rich world of symbology and symbols. There may be a transconceptual dimension to our consciousness. There may be many more energies contained in us than we have discovered up to now. A religious person uses what is available, what has been made available by the forefathers, by the total human past, but never accepts the authority as the last word about life. You know, the last word about life has never been said, and shall never be sad. Life is infinite. And then she continues, and I will continue tomorrow. Very beautiful, no? So I wish you a good day.